Sorry, folks, we're having some technical workouts here. Let me get back to the actual presentation here. Okay, so can everybody see my screen okay? Yep, okay, got a thumbs up on that one. Again, welcome to, at least for me, the 4th Turfgrass Management Seminar for professional managers located in the Middle Eastern countries and South Africa this year. And again, for those of you that don't know him, I'd like to welcome Dr. Carl Dannyberger. He's another one of our turfgrass experts here at the Ohio State University. And of course, we have the inimitable Mike O'Keefe. I think most of you have met Mike or somewhere run into Mike in his worldwide travels. And then finally, I want to give a real shout out and thank you to Khatib. Khatib is with Polyclean and is the sponsor of these seminars. And so in this particular session, we'd like to concentrate on the mole crickets. I've had several requests from the folks that are in the Middle Eastern area to talk about the mole crickets. And I kind of wanted to talk about the mole crickets a little bit earlier in our series, but it just worked out with the different holidays and celebrations that everybody has there that we had to put it off until this time. And then Khatib also said, could you sneak in ants? And so we're going to also try to do a little bit of discussion about ants. Well, first, what are mole crickets? And mole crickets to me are totally fascinating. I remember when I first found my first mole cricket as a teenager living in Oklahoma, I said, my God, what is this thing? It's an amazing animal. Basically, the name mole cricket should indicate pretty much what they're all about. They're basically the insect equivalent of a mole. Now, in biology, we have what we call convergent evolution. When you've got two animals that do the same kind of behavior, activity, and so forth, they will probably evolve the same equipment to do that activity. And so if we take a look at the mole cricket, the first thing that to me that's most obvious is that their front pair of legs have been highly modified. They've got these very large claws in the front. The front legs are very stout. The next thing that you will notice is that the head and the thorax are also highly modified into sort of this shield-like structure that fits at the front of the head. Now, why do they have this? Well, mole crickets literally swim. They do the breaststroke through the soil. So they have these front legs that they push forward with those claws. They then push them to the side. They use their strong hind legs to shove the body forward, and then they shove down with the legs, and that lifts the soil up. For those of you that have ever seen a mole cricket tunnel, you'll see that it's just like the regular mole. The mammalian mole has the same kind of equipment. Its front legs are modified into these very large, stout legs with the claws on the end of them. They also do the breaststroke through the soil using their hind legs to push it forwards. And so they have this rather unusual modification. Now, it's also for people who have never popped one of these out of the ground. They are crickets. They're closely related to some of the other regular crickets, and being in the Orthoptera, which are the crickets and the grasshoppers, or locusts, they also have the hind legs modified not only to push the insect forward, but to jump. And sometimes when you pop one of these things out, you'll see them around, and sometimes could be a little bit difficult to capture. Now, Carl Danneberger has been with us when we've flushed some of these out. So as Mike, we used to have sessions down in Florida where they have lots of mole crickets. And I think the first time that I handed each one of them a mole cricket, they weren't sure they wanted to handle them. And I said, here, try to hold this mole cricket. And they soon realized you can't hold a mole cricket very long because they do use those very strong front legs to dig through your fingers. And so they'll dig through your fingers and fall out pretty quickly. Now, here's the problem with the mole crickets. Mole crickets, as they go through the turf, now this is a grass that's been damaged by the mole crickets, and what you'll probably, your eyes will be first drawn to is all the soil that's being pushed up. But what I also want you to notice is the little yellow streaks in through this Bermuda grass. All those yellow streaks are where these mole crickets have been tunneling under the surface of the turf. That tunneling, unfortunately, separates the soil from the roots of the turf grass. And we all know what's going to happen to turf grass in the sun. When the roots are not in good contact with the soil, they can't take up the moisture correctly. They will start to die out. And so we can see here, all of this yellowing is due to the roots being separated from the soil. Now, in this image, you can also see one that has been doing its swimming right close to the surface. So you can see a fairly recent activity of a mole cricket right here that has been moving through that turf grass. Now, I apologize. I don't have a lot of mole cricket pictures from Dubai. I think we popped them out a couple of times when I made a visit there. Unfortunately, they were fairly small nymphs. I didn't get a good adult picture. But what I'd like to do is kind of give you an introduction to what we know about mole crickets here in North America. Here in North America, we basically have 4 species that are important to us in turf grass. We actually have, we think, about 7 to 8 species of mole crickets, but those other species are generally fairly rare, very limited in distribution, and we don't see them very often, especially in managed turf. So the ones that we see the most common are the tawny mole cricket, southern mole cricket, and short-winged mole crickets. Notice that I do have all of these asterisk, and these are actually imported species. They're ones that have been introduced from South America. They are semi-tropical species, so we generally only find them in our southern states. So virtually all of the states surrounding our Gulf of Mexico and all the way up the eastern seaboard up into North Carolina is about as far north as they occur. On the other hand, we do have a native mole cricket. And again, you'll notice that these things are in different genera. The Neoscapteriscus are the ones from South America, and the Neocortella used to be just called Cortella hexadactyla, but of course the taxonomists are always changing names, and so they recently revised this and give our native mole cricket a new name. Now, our native mole cricket is really kind of interesting in that it has the ability to withstand freezing temperatures during the wintertime. I don't think you're going to have to be worried about that in the Middle Eastern countries. But basically, how does it survive the freezing temperatures? It just keeps going deeper into the soil. So our native mole cricket actually extends all the way up into southern Canada, and it seems to be restricted by permafrost. So wherever there is permafrost, you won't find the native mole cricket, but where the soils never really freeze during the wintertime, you can have native mole crickets. And I find it, again, kind of interesting. Just the last 2 weeks, I've had 2 of Ohio golf course superintendents sending me pictures of either the damage of the native mole cricket or they've used a detergent flush to flush them out, and have sent me pictures of them. Of course, they're not very common here in Ohio. They're usually more of a curiosity. Our native mole cricket is what we call a wetland species, and so it typically is found maybe near a pond, water hazards, if there's or streams or something else running either through the course or nearby the course. These native mole crickets will often set up places there. Now, what do these things look like? Each one of the mole crickets are slightly different in morphology. You'll notice that the native mole cricket that we have, now I guess first thing is if you'll look at the head and the pronotum and the front pair of legs, that's all pretty standard. They all have that same enlarged front leg used for digging, the enlarged pronotum for shoving the soil up. But if you'll notice, there are different color markings on them. And in the case of the native mole cricket, the front pair of wings are short. And as a matter of fact, there's two forms of our native mole cricket. There's one that has what we call brachypterous wings, meaning the hind wings, this little thing that's sticking out here up underneath the front wings. In many cases, the pictures that people have been sending me, those hind wings extend to the tip of the abdomen, and in that case, those mole crickets can fly. And so that's another kind of an unusual thing. I've been down in both Texas and in Florida in the springtime when these mole crickets are flying around, and it's pretty amazing to be in a shopping center. Usually after they've had a fairly nice warm rainfall event during the daytime, and then in the evening when the lights of the parking lot are on, these could be attracted to those lights, and there may be hundreds of these running around in the parking lot. And while it's interesting to me watching the mole crickets, it's actually more interesting watching people because when these mole crickets fly around and they land, they're jumping around. They look like these horrible creatures that have come out, from some alien spaceship. And the people are always, I hear the lady shrieking and the guys going, ah, and getting in their cars and driving off and trying to avoid them. But it's just basically another way that mole crickets can move from one location to another. And we do know that the European mole cricket and the African mole cricket do have the ability as adults to fly around. Now we have another mole cricket here. You'll notice that another one of our African mole crickets is what is called the short wing mole cricket. This is one in both the front wings and hind wings are short. This one's not capable of flying around, but I find it interesting that over the 3 to 4 decades that this species has been in Florida, it has steadily moved around in Florida. Does get moved around. We now know that in Florida they do a lot of construction, and I know in a lot of your countries there's a lot of construction going on, and so you get these big dump trucks and front end loaders, and they'll load up soil in these dump trucks, take them to the new location, spread that soil out. What they don't realize is that there may be mole cricket nymphs in that soil, and so even if you've got species that can't fly, they can often move around through movement of soil. So here are the two species that we have that I suspect are potential species in the Middle Eastern countries. And these would be both the African mole cricket and the European mole cricket. Now, you might think that the African mole cricket is primarily a semi-tropical species, but it does extend all the way down into South Africa, where you do have the potential of cold weather during the wintertime. It has also been transported over into Australia. And again, through the movement of sod or grasses, we suspect that the eggs and maybe the nymphs of these mole crickets have been moved around. Same thing with the European mole cricket. The European mole cricket species also is capable of withstanding freezing temperatures. So that's not an issue, but they're also very well adapted to withstand hot temperatures. Now, how can they withstand hot temperatures? Well, not only do they dig laterally from side to side, they can dig up and down. And so basically mole crickets, if it starts getting really, really hot, when you're getting some of those 40 degrees centigrade days, they're deep in the soil. They'll be down anywhere from a foot to several meters down in the soil, depending again on the soil conditions and how well they can dig. Now, it is notice that I have a complex. I've talked to some mole cricket taxonomists recently, and virtually all of them believe that they're probably dealing, what we call the African mole cricket may be a complex of 3 to 4 species. Now, what does that mean to me? That means to me that there may also be some slightly different behaviors for each one of these, but they'll have the same basic behavior. My feeling is that some of them may be more adapted for either extreme heat or cooler conditions or wet conditions or drier conditions. We find out that when we get these species complexes, they're usually adapted for those kinds of environmental conditions. And the same thing, there's some belief now that the European mole crickets may be 3 species in that particular complex. Now, how do we identify the mole crickets? We look at their toes. I sort of say that jokingly. If you've ever held a mole cricket, it's not that easy to look at their front toes because they're trying to dig out of your hand when you have them. But most of the mole crickets that are from South America are what we call 3-toed mole crickets. And so you can see here that there's 3 larger toes in those. Now, the tawny mole cricket actually looks like it only has 2 toes in that. But the ones that you should have in your particular area, all of the Hexadaxyla species should be what we call 4-toed mole crickets. And so, again, sometimes if you're running into mole cricket issues and you're having a discussion with me, I might ask you to go out and use a detergent flush to flush out some of the mole crickets to get some specimens and confirm that indeed you are dealing with those 4-toed mole crickets. And that would tell me that indeed you are probably dealing with the African mole cricket, but you may be dealing with one of the European species that's out there. Now, if you happen to find a 3-toed mole cricket, we're in real trouble, because what that would indicate is that somehow you've imported some of the species from South America. Also notice that the mole crickets in the pronotum area, they do have different color patterns that we often use to separate these out. However, from what I've heard from the taxonomists, both the African mole crickets and the European mole crickets are pretty much just sort of a undifferentiated solid brown color. Now, if you do get mole crickets out of the ground, especially if they're adult mole crickets, there are very distinctive differences between the males and the females. Now, you can't see these differences, obviously, with the nymphs. The nymphs are not going to be sexually differentiated, but when they do become adults, they do have this what we call sexual dimorphism. What that dimorphism, if you'll notice here, if we look at the wings or the base of the wings, the females, virtually all of the wing veins are fairly straight. You can see a little curve here in those. But notice that in the males, one of the wings has this very distinctive notch in here. So you can see that notch on the wings. Now, why this differentiation? Well, if you know regular crickets, crickets chirp in order to communicate with each other. So that means that mole crickets actually have ears. They have ears at the bases of their front legs. So when the male does his chirping sound, what he's doing is he's setting up shop and saying, hey, I'm here. If there's any ladies in the neighborhood that need a little extra servicing, I'm here to help you. And so the males will chorus, meaning sing. And it's kind of interesting. We'll talk about this in a minute. They actually throw up a little mound of soil to sort of act as an echo chamber. And they'll get into that chamber and they'll start making the chirp. What's kind of interesting about the echo chamber is that it directs the sound in one direction. And so I've been out at nighttime listening to the mole crickets, and they're really tough to find and locate unless you actually walk around kind of in a circle, and all of a sudden you'll see, oh, the sound is kind of low here. It's kind of, it's stronger over there. So if you approach it from the stronger area, you'll eventually find where the little mole cricket is singing. Now, another interesting thing about mole crickets is that the males have ears also in their front legs, and the males are attracted to other males. And so when the first male sets up his little echo chamber and starts singing, other males hear that and they'll come to that area also, and they'll also begin to sing, so that you get this, what we call group chorusing. And you might wonder, well, why in the world would they do this? Well, the more noise they can make, the more females they can draw into an area from a longer distance. And so by having these groups of males clustered together, all singing at the same time, there's a better chance for each of them to have a female to come in to mate with. And now, where do these mole crickets normally do this chorusing? They like moist, wet soil. And so generally where you're going to find the most mole crickets is around where you might have water features, water hazards, or places like that. And so when I'm down in Florida, I can almost always guarantee we're going to find lots of mole crickets if they have some retention ponds or watering ponds or something like that in the area. The mole crickets are going to be concentrated around the edge of those water features. Now, I know most of you in the African countries, you may not have the same kind of water features. You may just have, primarily bunkers and so forth, but you do have irrigation. And what you'll find is that irrigation, in spite of our best efforts, is usually not equal across the course. There will be some wetter areas from your irrigation. And in essence, that's where you're going to find more of these mole crickets. Now, another interesting thing about the mole crickets is that we've talked about other insects like the bill bugs and the white grubs. Those insects all had what we can call a complete life cycle. And mole crickets are more primitive insects that have what we call an incomplete life cycle. What does that mean? That means that the adult lays eggs. Those eggs hatch out into what we call nymphs. And as you can see, the nymphs are really just a miniature version of the adult. They have the same body shape. They have the same front legs. They have the same hind legs. It's just that they're smaller. Now, it appears that most mole crickets will probably undergo 6 to maybe 10 nymphal molts. We find that here in the United States, when they're in good living conditions, it appears to be about 8 molts normally, but we do know that the number of molts or the number of nymphal instars can vary according to the seasons. In other words, if you've got seasons that are prolonged cold or prolonged hot, that can delay the development of the nymphs, and so they may undergo an extra instar or two. In other words, they may molt an extra time because of as they're moving around. You can imagine as they're moving around through the soil, that soil can be pretty abrasive to their exoskeleton. And so not only do they have to molt to grow, They also occasionally will molt as a nymph to replace that exoskeleton that may have been damaged through their tunneling activities. Eventually, however, as you'll notice, as the nymphs get larger, they will develop what appears to be distinctive wing pads. And then finally, once they become the fully developed adults, they'll have full wings. Notice that at least the hind wings do extend to the tip of the abdomen. The front wings are often a little bit shorter than the hind wings. And of course, in this picture, you can again see the difference between the male that has the little points at the base of the wing versus the female that doesn't have those. Now, I mentioned the chorusing. This is actually a chorus chamber. And what you'll see here, this is about 6 inches across here from one edge to the other. What we have is a male that's come up to the surface. He's pushed up the soil here, and he's pushed open the soil on one side of this chamber and the other side of the chamber. He's going to sit right in the middle of this, and at nighttime, raise his front wings, rub those front wings together to make his chirping sound. And that sound's going to go out this direction and that direction. And so, as I indicated, it is quite directional once they set up these little echo chambers or sounding chambers to try to get the adults to come in. We've already mentioned that once the first male that tends to establish this, he can often attract other males. And I've been in areas, again, usually near a wetland habitat, where there may be 20 to 30 of these little echo chambers that have been pushed up. You can see them the following morning. They're very evident there. However, don't expect to find the bull cricket there by the morning. They know that predators know what these things are. And especially some of the bird predators will come in and they'll pick these and see if they can find the mole cricket that's in there. But the mole crickets have figured that out. And typically by the morning, that male mole cricket that was in there chorusing will have dug deeper into the soil to make it difficult for predators to find them. All right. Now I'm going to use the tawny mole cricket as my example of the life cycle of a mole cricket. The reason why I'm going to use this one is it's the one semi-tropical species that we have really good data with, also in a warm habitat. So this life cycle is from some entomologists that have done research for many years down in South Florida. And so what I want to point out here is that for the tawny mole cricket, notice that you can find adults over a pretty extended period of the year. What does that mean? Well, all that means to me is that not only do we have nymphs that are developing into the adults, but once they reach the adult stage, the adults can live for a long period of time. Now, even in Florida, it does get cold enough that the mole crickets are pretty much dormant in those December, January, February periods. But typically in early March or April, as the temperatures begin to warm up, they will begin to come up to the surface. And what I've got marked here is the chorusing period. This would be the time that the adult mole crickets are coming up to the surface area, doing their chorusing and trying to mate. However, I've been in Florida, been in Texas, and even here in October and November, I can go out at nighttime and I can hear mole crickets chirping. I remember the one time that I visited Dubai, we were there in June, and I went out on a couple of the golf courses in the evening, and even in June, I was hearing mole crickets chorusing. And so these adult male mole crickets, anytime the temperature is warm enough, and typically if there's been a recent irrigation event or a rainfall event, they will come up and do some chorusing in the attempt to try to find a female to come and mate with them. However, if you take the totality, in other words, if you look at the vast majority of the population, most of them are doing their singing in this what we would consider to be spring window. Now, typically after that coursing and mating, the females will begin laying eggs. And again, I take a look, while I've got this indicated that the vast majority of the eggs of the tawny mole cricket are laid in late May through June into early July. Notice that the extent of egg production lasts for almost 5 months in here. And so, again, I want to point out when we're dealing with mole crickets, you don't have, like we do in many of the white grub species, these very distinct periods where you have one stage or another stage. You have generally very overlapping stages of these mole crickets. However, if you're going to manage these mole crickets, you do need to sort of pay attention to when is the vast majority of the population doing something. And so my feeling is, if you're dealing with the African mole cricket, it's genetically geared to be doing most of its mating and most of its egg laying probably in that May and June window. That's the time that it's going to be doing most of its egg laying. Now, the eggs take a couple of weeks to develop and then hatch out into the nymphs. And as you can see here, the nymphs develop fairly rapidly, but the nymphs, again, take a fairly long time to develop. Now, if I were to give you the life cycle of the northern mole cricket that we have here in Ohio, that species, because of our prolonged cold winter temperatures, often takes, as a nymph, 2 years to complete its development. In the tropical and semi-tropical species, and most of the ones that you're going to find in the Middle Eastern countries, it's probably just 1 generation per year. However, we have seen in South Florida, my daughter lives in the Naples, Florida area, down around Miami, and what we do find down there is in that where it's continuously warm, this gets kind of mixed up. Even while the majority of the population looks like this, we do see a fair number of nymphs that are present year-round, and we see a fair number of adults that are found year-round. But I try to teach the golf course superintendents that are in those areas, don't worry about all those little outliers. Don't worry about those few nymphs and those few adults that aren't following this life cycle the way that you would expect them to. What you really need to be thinking about, what is the majority of the mole crickets doing? And the majority of the mole crickets, the most important thing I want you to notice is that the majority of the mole crickets are in those early instars in this late May, June, early July window. Now, why do we need to know that? Well, the first, second, and third instar mole cricket nymphs aren't capable of digging very deep in the soil. They also have to feed. They have to be feeding primarily on the roots, though some of these mole crickets are also predatory. If they run into another mole cricket or another insect, if they're bigger than that other insect, they'll eat it. And so these mole crickets can feed on each other. They can feed on other insects. They can feed on the white grubs that are in there. They can feed on the billbug larvae that might be in the soil. They might even feed on some of the caterpillars that could be in the soil. But the bottom line is that these first 3 instars of nymphs are generally fairly close to the soil surface during those periods of the month, or those periods. That would be, again, late May, June, early July. And I'm going to probably concentrate in that late June, early July. That's when you're going to have the vast majority of those small nymphs there. Why? Hopefully you could figure that out. If we're going to use an insecticide to kill mole crickets, we want these mole crickets to be actively feeding as close to the soil surface as we can get them. And so those little tiny nymphs are what we want to target. Now, you'll talk to golf course superintendents that regularly deal with mole crickets in the Carolinas and Florida, and they'll say, oh, we kill mole crickets at almost any time of the year. But when you finally really discuss with them what they're doing to manage the mole crickets, virtually all of them make an application to kill the vast majority of the small mole crickets that are active near the soil surface. There will always be some escapes. There will always be, like I said, there might be some adult mole crickets at that time that you made that application. Those can dig much deeper in the soil. They may have escaped your application. And so be prepared. If you've got mole crickets, just understand you're never going to totally eliminate all of the population in any one application. You're probably going to need multiple applications. One primary application to kill as many of the tiny nymphs as you can, and then maybe some supplemental applications where you might have a large nymph or adult activity that shows up at other times during the season.
Dave, I'm just curious if Khatib has seen mole crickets in Dubai and around the Middle East, and if so, what treatment they're using on them.
Yeah, we'll get to the treatments here in a minute, let me finish the life cycle here. The biggest hassle with mole crickets is when they're in these adult stages. These are the stages that often will dig down deep into the soil, so they will escape your applications. These are times also, since these are the adults, the males are flying around, the females are flying around, the males are attracting the females are coming around. These are the times that it drives turf managers nuts. And the reason for this is that you may think you've gotten everything under control, everything's doing fine, and you walk out in one morning and two of your greens have a mole cricket male that landed on that green, or a female. She dug in or he dug in, and you've got this, 0.5 meter to 1 meter long tunnel right through your green. And it's just where they landed. It's where they dug in. It was probably because that green may have been irrigated the day before and as a moisture habitat, so they were attracted to that. And there's really not much you can do about that other than get a bucket of soap water out or detergent water and flush both ends of that tunnel and get that darn mole cricket adult out of there and smash it. And there's not much you can do chemically at that period of time. And they can just be a real headache, because then you've got to repair that damage that was on the greens. But I just wanted to point out that there's these two windows where mole crickets can just drive turf managers crazy because of that activity of the adults. Now, you've heard me talk about the detergent flush for these. Again, I'm a real proponent of this. You can see here, this is me out doing a detergent flush for flushing up cutworms and armyworms. And I actually, I have a 150-gallon water tank that I put into one of my carts. And then I've got a little takeoff pump on the end of that. And I'll empty a whole bottle of dishwashing detergent inside that tank, and then I can flush large areas to do our sampling. I don't expect you to do that, but I just pointed out that if you do have a little auxiliary tank that you use for spot spraying or something like that, you can fill it up with water. Now, when I say I dump a bottle of the detergent, typically if you got Dawn or Joy, those two detergents are the ones that we've done extensive testing with that don't seem to be causing any phytotoxicity. I know Dr. Danny Berger recommends using Joy fairly commonly for localized dry spots. And so many of you may have those detergents. Now, if you don't have either one of those detergents available to you, don't go mixing up a whole bunch of these detergents and going out and putting it on your turf, because like Palmolive detergent is a great herbicide. We've tried Palmolive several times, and a day after we've used the Palmolive detergent, the turf turns yellow, and if we use too high a rate, it will actually die. So some of these dishwashing detergents can be toxic, and I've heard from some of the golf course superintendents, they said, well, we tried some of our ball washing detergent, and we found out that did cause some phytotoxicity. So my feeling is, if you can get your hands in it and wash without too much problem, wash dishes and things like that, go ahead and give it a try out in a area, obviously not on your greens and tees. Go out and give it a try. What is the amount that we put in there? It would be about 5 milliliters per gallon of water, and so you can calculate what that's like. Normally, I get these 1 pint bottles of dishwashing detergent, and I'll use about a third of that bottle in my in about 50 gallons of water, and so that would be the normal rate that we would use. Now, here's one where we've actually I use just a plain old paint bucket. Most of you will have buckets around, plastic buckets that are those 3 to 5 gallon buckets, and usually I just use like a 3 gallon bucket, fill it up with maybe about 2 gallons of water, put in about 3 tablespoons of dishwashing detergent in that water, mix it up, and then I'll just kind of pour it over about a 1 square meter area. If the mole crickets are there, they will usually start coming up. Now you can see here, I had seen what looks like, you can see what looks like a mole cricket trail here. So I use that detergent flush, and sure enough, out popped 2. I can see a fairly large nymph and a sort of a medium-sized nymph that popped out from that. Now, if you're in the Middle Eastern countries and it's been very hot and very dry, you may need to do a double flush in an area. So if you're seeing what looks like mole cricket activity and you do a flush and nothing comes up, do it again about maybe 5 or 6 minutes apart. The reason why you need to do that is that if that mole cricket is down a half a meter to a meter down in the soil, it will take a double flush of that detergent water, go down the burrow and reach where the mole cricket is. But as soon as that soapy or detergent water hits the mole cricket, it's going to go, I need to get out of here, and it will try to dig up to the surface, try to expose its body to dry out that detergent water. And we know that this detergent water is very irritating to them. I say it's the equivalent of getting soap in your eyes. You go, oh my God, it burns, it hurts. Now, most of these mole crickets will actually die. So detergent is a fairly good insecticide for these mole crickets. But typically when I'm out flushing them, what I will do is as soon as they come up to the surface, I'll grab the mole crickets and I'll rinse them off in some fresh water, put them into another bucket, and I usually get about 70% survival. You might only say, what in the world do I want to save the mole cricket for? Well, of course, I'm doing experiments with them. I might often will bring mole crickets back to the laboratory in order to do some experiments or work with them, or just show my students the behavior of the mole crickets. Now, remember that window that I indicated, that late April, May, and early June window, when we've got the females chorusing or the males chorusing, the females coming in and mating with them. Well, the female's going to lay eggs shortly after that period. One of the strategies that we've learned down in Florida of how to best time your insecticide application for mole cricket nympho control is to determine exactly when are the mole cricket females going to be laying their eggs. Now, here's 2 female mole crickets that I flushed up. I used the detergent flush. And actually, these both came up at the same time. If I remember correctly, this was mid-May when I was down in the Naples, Florida area. And so when I got them up, I noticed, number 1, they were female. Number 2, they had this really big, fat abdomen. So that meant that they were full of eggs. And I hope the animal rights people don't get to me here. But I pulled out my pocket knife and I used my small sharp blade, and I just cut a little slit up the side of the abdomen of the mole cricket and squeezed it. Here you can see the female has eggs that are still very light in color. And so these eggs are probably still maybe 3 weeks away from being fully developed and being laid. On the other hand, here is a female that had fully developed eggs. Notice that these are a darker amber color or a darker yellow color. These are within days of being ready to be laid. Now, why are we doing this? Well, if you go out, flush out some females, and virtually all of the females that you find have these developing eggs, what that means is that you're probably about 3 weeks away from the time that you maybe want to be thinking about putting your insecticide down. On the other hand, if you're popping out females that have, most of them have eggs that look like this, you probably better get up and get your insecticide out pretty quickly, especially if you're going to use an insecticide that has some residual activity. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. Speaking of the insecticides, now there's a whole bunch of insecticides that when I'm talking to golf course superintendents and sport field managers that have mole crickets in the southern states, these are generally the insecticides that they talk about. I've got a whole bunch of superintendents that are in the Carolinas and in South Carolina and North Carolina that still use acephate or orthene. And basically they make every 2 months, they'll make another acephate application during the growing season. And so from, they'll probably make their first application in mid to late April. Then they'll come back in June, they'll make another application. I'm always a little bit worried about that because when you make multiple applications of the same insecticide, you always run the risk of developing resistance. So far, we haven't seen that resistance factor, but basically, why are they doing this? Well, this is the cheapest product they can get for that mole crickets. Unfortunately, or depending on how you look at it, many of the countries don't allow acephate. It's an old organophosphate insecticide. It has a very distinctive odor to it. And it is effective for mole crickets, but the residual of this, really, they say, well, the residual lasts 2 weeks. No. The residual probably only lasts for about 10 to 14 days. But when you kill mole crickets at that surface, you don't see their activity for a period of time, and you may not see their activity again until a few weeks later or a month or so later. And so then they make the other application. Carbaryl or 7 is another one. And let me point out that both of these, orthene and carbaryl, only remain at the soil surface. They really don't penetrate very well down into the root system of the plants. Dilox or trichlorophon is another organophosphate. Now 7 is a carbamate insecticide. Again, in most countries, these have now been banned, at least for turfgrass usage. You can probably still find them in agricultural usage. The one that's probably used most commonly here in the United States now for mold cricket control is Fipronil. Fipronil has a long residual activity. It gets down in the soil thatch interface. And because of that long effective residual, often 2 to 3 months of effective residual, typically you can make one application and be done with mold crickets for the season. What's the problem with Fipronil? It has a very low LD50 for humans or mammals, which means it's highly toxic. And here in the United States, you have to actually have a license in order to apply, to either purchase or apply Fipronil. And I find that again, a lot of other countries follow that same routine, that they don't allow Fipronil products except in some unusual agricultural areas or in some unusual pest management areas. Fipronil is also an extremely good ant control material. And so in those countries where they have fire ants or other major ants that can cause health problems, they will often allow Fipronil to be used. And likewise, Fipronil is very good for termite control. Fipronil has pretty well changed the termite control industry because one application of Fipronil will apparently eliminate termite colonies. Now notice that I list all of these insecticides as curatives. In other words, you make the application of these insecticides when you've got active nymphs feeding close to the soil surface. That's the time that you want to kill them. However, we do know that if you do have some adults that are actively feeding up at the soil surface, you can kill them with the orthene and 7. There's also some evidence that the Fipronil can also do some activity against the larger mold crickets as long as they're up feeding at the soil thatch interface. Some other curatives are there's a whole slew of the Pyrethroids. I consider the Pyrethroids to be pretty much equivalent to the 7 and the orthene or acephate that I indicated before. Virtually all of these Pyrethroids, in spite of what the technical managers will tell you, 7 to 10 days of active residual activity is all you're going to get out of any of these. And so some of the superintendents that are using these, especially down in South Florida, usually make these applications when they know that the eggs have just hatched. They've got the first, second, and third instar nymphs active at the soil surface. And the way that they use these is that they'll make a heavy irrigation the night before they're going to make the application. Then late in the day, they'll make the application of the Pyrethroid. And basically what they're doing is they're coaxing the tiny mold crickets to be active at the soil surface level. Then when they make this application late in the day, those little nymphal mold crickets are most active right at dusk. They'll come into contact with these insecticides. And, you know, some superintendents say we don't like to do this because we've actually come out the next morning and we didn't realize how many nymphs we had there. You can have an entire green or tea completely covered with little tiny dead hopping nymphs or twitching nymphs the following morning. And you may actually have to brush those off in order to get them out of there. If there's only a few of them, usually your greens mower will pick them up in the baskets and mow them off that way. But I caution you when you're, you know, if you've not assessed the number of mold crickets that you might have in a particular area, when you're using these curative materials to try to control the little nymphal mold crickets, you may have a lot of mold crickets on the surface the day after that application. Now you'll notice there's a non-pyrethroid here, Indoxicard, under the trade name of Advion. I only mentioned this one. This is a Syngenta product that is being sold here in the United States. It was actually developed as a field crop insecticide for insects that were resistant to pyrethroids. It's a very expensive product. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't see any advantage of using indoxacarb over the pyrethroids for mole crickets, because we don't have any documented evidence that the mole crickets are resistant to the pyrethroids. Now, here's the insecticides that I think are going to be most useful to you. And I think hopefully you'll recognize virtually all of these insecticides. These are the same ones that we've been using and recommending for bill bug control and white grub control. What we're talking about is a pretty good group here of neonicotinoids. We've got the imidacloprid, thiamethoxam, and clothianidin. Here are the trade names that we have here in the United States. And notice that we have acelepryn, the chlorantraniliprole. Now, here's the deal when it comes to these. Notice that I have these listed as preventives. Now, what do I mean by preventives? You want to make the application of these insecticides when the mole cricket males and females are singing, okay, or when the males are singing and the females are being attracted to them. Why would I want to make that application that early? Virtually all of these insecticides, the one that lasts the least is imidacloprid, thiamethoxam. Those should still have 8 weeks of effective residual activity. So if you're hearing the mole cricket singing, let's say in late April, early May, you go out the next week, make an application of imidacloprid or thiamethoxam. The residues of that insecticide will still be in the soil thatch interface for 4 to 8 weeks later when the eggs hatch and the little nymphs first come to the soil surface. And so that will take them out. That's what we mean by a preventive. You're taking out the little tiny nymphs before they can even get started to do any activity. Now, if you have the ability to get clothianidin, that one seems to give us 10 weeks of effective residual. So almost, 2.5 months of effective residual. When we're talking about the acelepryn, we're talking about 12 to 16 weeks of effective residual in that soil thatch interface. So again, these are products that I think most of you will have the ability in your area to obtain. But to use these most effectively, you need to be thinking about preventing mole cricket activity rather than curing mole cricket activity. If you do have the ability, if you're in a country that does allow Fipronil, this would be one of the major products of choice. And Fipronil, again, the applications of that seems to be giving us 6 to 8 weeks of effective residual activity, both as a preventive and as a curative insecticide. But like I said, Fipronil has a fairly high mammalian toxicity, so many of the countries don't allow applications of that particular product. Okay, I'm going to take a quick break right here and field some questions. See if we've got any things.
Dave, did you see the question from Sati? All these chemicals are banned in the UAE. What are the options?
Well, Khatib, are you still have acelepryn available?
Yeah, basically, all the curative product that you listed, Dave, are banned. Acephate, carbaryl, Fipronil, even. They are all gone.
Sure.
Okay, so now we only have available the imidacloprid, the thiamethoxam, and the chlorantraniliprole. And I think the chlorothianidin is available.
Okay. And so if you have those two products available, I think the most important take-home message from this is that you have to use those as preventive insecticides. So if you've got some mole crickets out there later in the season, I'm sorry, about all you're going to be able to do is maybe do some detergent flushing in those areas, try to knock out those mold crickets. If you've got some adult mold crickets moving into some of your greens or tees, or if you're in a sport field, in some of your shortcut areas that are causing some trouble, you may just have to do some of that detergent flushing to try to knock them down, take them out. Another thing that we didn't talk about is environmental management. Remember that mold crickets like it where it's moist. And so if you can keep your turf on the dry side, especially when you're dealing with the larger nymphs and the adults, that will force them deeper into the soil. And so they will only be active when the soil surface is wet and moist. And so what I would suggest is, good irrigation practices. I noticed that when I was in Dubai, there was a lot of nighttime irrigation going on. And so my feeling is, if you could delay that irrigation to in the morning or, still at nighttime, but late at night, early in the morning, so that turf grass tends to dry off during the daytime, that will keep the mold crickets suppressed. It will keep them lower in the soil profile until you can wait during the time of the year in that April, May, early June window to use one of these insecticides as a preventive control to target the small nymphs.
Hey Dave, is the chloropyrifos and deltamethrin, all those generic, has any effect in mold cricket?
Yes, we do know that the chlorantraniliprole and some of the other, remember that Bayer may be bringing you another one of the diamide chemistries. Bayer now has tetrino, tetraniliprole, which is, I would say, fairly similar to chlorantraniliprole. However, tetraniliprole seems to have even lower water solubility, so it takes even a little bit longer to get into the soil profile than chlorantraniliprole. But chlorantraniliprole, if you have effective residuals in that soil thatch interface at the time that the little mold cricket nymphs are hatching out, it should be a very effective control. As far as curative control, I've not seen any good activity with chlorantraniliprole to cure an active infestation of large mold cricket nymphs or adults. I do see here that there's a question from Stephen. What about the detergent for other insects and grubs? Actually, I've been able to kill some of the grub adults. Remember that I recommended in our grub session that if you think you're dealing with the African black beetle, in which the adults can live for a long period of time, do the detergent flush, and that will bring those adults up. And so sometimes it's a good monitoring tool to also bring the adult beetles up. And I've seen in some cases where those beetles come up to the surface, especially in the daytime in the sun, they can't dry that detergent off fast enough, and they'll actually get roasted in the sun, and you'll kill them that way. But I'm not sure I'd recommend that as a control method for your white grubs. It's more of a monitoring tool to bring them up. Same thing with the bill bugs. If you're not sure that you might have bill bugs in an area, this detergent flush will bring up the adult bill bugs so that you can confirm whether you've got them. And then likewise, we use that detergent flush for the caterpillars. And it is quite effective on caterpillars. I often have a real hard time recovering caterpillars that I've flushed up with a detergent to bring them back to the laboratory, because they have such thin exoskeleton that just that single application of the detergent that brought them up to the surface kills them before I can get them cleaned off and take them back to the laboratory. Good questions. Okay.
David, do you
Well,
recommend?
not seeing more questions. Yes.
Yeah, there is one question here, Dave. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, my feeling is that the mole crickets, when I was there, and that was in I believe it was late June. It was getting terribly hot when we went there. That or wait a minute, no, Khatib, we were there in the fall, weren't we? Were in October.
I think we were in October and we did the flushing in Monty golf course and the mole cricket popped out.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That was
and
October.
basically what we flushed up was some fairly mature nymphs, and so that would tell me that your life cycle is actually fairly close to South Florida, and again, you know, even if you can find adults or nymphs, you can find those almost any time during the year. What you have to be thinking about is the life cycle, and my feeling is the life cycle of this African species complex is going to be very similar to what we see in South Florida. So most of the adults are going to be there in what would be our springtime. That would be in your March, April, May window. And then the tiny nymphs are going to be there in late May through June. And so if you think about that as your timing for your celiprin, that would be the optimal time to go after the mole crickets.
Do you recommend using any soil penetrant with insecticide mix to move the product from the soil profile?
That's always a real that's always a real contentious, and you know, I hate to say it, I have had contracts with virtually all of the chemical companies and all of the companies that sell wetting agents and so-called penetrants, and I have never been able to show a significant improvement of an insecticide application with the addition of those surfactants and penetrants. Now, with that said, if you do have issues with localized dry spot, and maybe sometime you'll bring in Dr. Danny Berger to talk about this. He's one of the world's experts on dry spots and how to manage those localized dry spots. If you do have localized dry spots, you're not going to get any insecticide through that dry spot to begin with. So you probably need to deal with your wetting agents and core aerification, whatever you need to do to deal with that localized dry spot first. Once you get that localized dry spot dealt with and you can now get irrigation water through there, now you can apply your insecticide, and with regular irrigation, get your insecticide into that soil thatch interface. But to try to use a surfactant or penetrant with the insecticide first, not going to work. Not going to improve your activity. We've had also, I've had superintendents that have said, what about core aerification? If I core aerify and then apply the insecticide and water it in, your brain, your logic says, well, that'll wash the insecticide down the holes and get it down to where it needs to be. That's not the way the system works. The insecticides get picked up by the water. As the water is moving down that hole, the insecticides get stuck on the organic matter on the sides of that hole. So they really don't get to the bottom of the hole. And so, again, we've tried all of those techniques. We've done extensive core aerification without top dressing, without anything added to it. No improvement of the insecticide activity. Actually, we've done that for white grubs. The extensive coring actually killed more grubs than the insecticide did. And so that was kind of an interesting side part of that particular experiment, because in that experiment, our check plot had to be core aerified also. And we found that we had a significant reduction of the grubs just by stabbing them with the core aerifying tines. But when we compared the treated plots that have been core aerified with just the plots that have been core aerified and not treated, we didn't get a significant increase in control. Great questions.
One last question from me, Dave, as well. What about granular insecticide? For example, lambda-cyhalothrin or imidacloprid. We can have them on a granular formulation.
Yeah,
not
my feeling is other than imidacloprid or merit, we know that imidacloprid is highly susceptible to ultraviolet radiation. And in the hot suns that you've got in your particular area, probably being on leaf blade surfaces for one day, it's going to be gone. And I always recommend, if you're going to use granules, granules are the preferred technique if you do have irrigation issues, because that granule will hold on to the insecticide until either an irrigation event or a rainfall event comes to move that insecticide off of the granule into the soil thatch interface. So, you know, if you're having insect problems, let's say in your rough areas or areas where you don't have irrigation, definitely consider granules. But if you're in an area where you can, you know, especially if you've got an irrigation system that you can hit the syringe cycle after you've treated, let's say, a fairway, it's always wise to at least knock the residue of that insecticide off of the leaf blades. It's not doing you any good on the leaf blades unless you're going after caterpillars. So it's always beneficial to at least hit the syringe cycle after you've done a liquid application to the turf to knock those residues off of the leaf blade, get it down at least to the soil surface or the thatch surface, and then when your regular irrigation kicks in, move it on into the soil thatch interface.
Thank you, Dave.
Okay, let's quickly talk about ants. I know we're already running a little bit over time here of what we had expected. Man, there are dozens of species of ants that can live in turf grass. What are the ants doing there? Ants are generally considered to be beneficial predators. However, they can also be a darn nuisance. And the nuisance factor comes in here in that many of these ants will kick up little mounds of soil. And you can't tolerate that, you know, on your greens and tees. Not only does it interfere with ball roll, but it will dull the mower blades. If you've got to sort of mow through that soil, especially if it's a sand-based green, that will dull the mower blades pretty rapidly. In some areas, you may also have stinging ants. And I guess there's something that I need to get on the table right now. When golfers are playing golf, when people are playing sports, their concentration should be on that game of golf, and their concentration needs to be on the sport. And I hate to say it, I have been out on golf courses where I have actually seen a golfer standing on top of a fire ant mound because that's where their ball landed, near that mound. They're totally oblivious that all of these fire ants are climbing up their leg and will soon sting them. And so it's one of those things that especially in some of your countries, if you've got stinging ants in your area and you've got golfers that are unfamiliar with those stinging ants, this is something that, you know, when they're in the pro shop, that needs to be mentioned to them. My feeling is you probably ought to put some signs up in there. Beware of these mounds. Take a picture of it. Beware of these mounds. Stay away from these because it's not pleasant to be stung, or some of the ants actually do some biting. And don't be stung or bit by these ants. You'll regret it. So sort of pay attention to what's going on. It's been my feeling, once a golf course or a golf player has experienced fire ants, they learn very quickly to watch exactly where they're standing with these. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the management of those ants, but I do want to point out that probably the biggest ones that we have trouble with on shortcut turf are the ones that build up these little mounds. Now, here's some pictures of them. The most common one that we have here in the United States are ants in the genus Lasius. And this genus is found worldwide. You'll find these all over the place. These are ants that they have a fairly large colony in the soil. The colonies will send up exploratory tubes or exit tubes to the soil over an area of maybe 10 meters by 10 meters. So it's a pretty large area. That'd be about 30-foot diameter area where that colony is occupying. And within that area, they can send up these little exploration tubes, and they will throw out little mounds of soil from those. Unfortunately, if those mounds of soil are kicked up on a green or a tee, that shading effect of that mound, if that's not brushed off of there pretty rapidly, can shade the turf and kill little patches of the turf in there. We've also indicated that if these mounds are thrown up during the daytime, that it can interfere with ball roll. And of course, the sand component of that can dull the mower blades. What I really wanted you to understand is that in the research that we've done with this ant, it seems that if you've got USGA type or sand type profiles in the greens, the ants rarely actually live in those profiles. They'll actually live in the soil adjacent to the greens and tees, but they will send these their activity tubes over into the green areas. And so typically when we find these mounds of soil, it's usually around the edge of a green or around the edge of the tee. It's not in the middle of it. Now, if you're getting them in the middle of it, that indicates that you probably have a different type of a soil profile and an ant colony that may actually be inside of the soil of that green. Now, for those of you that are sport field managers, I suspect most of your fields are soccer fields. You may have some croquet fields and things like that. Here in the United States, where we have what we call skinned surfaces, like in softball and baseball, these mounds can show up in those skinned areas. Now, it's usually not a problem in pro ball. The professionals can ignore them. Where it turns into be a real problem is when we have kids playing baseball. The kids, they're bored out there. The ball's not coming to them on a regular basis. And so we've had many cases where the kids watching the ants in the ant mounds near, first base, second base, or third base. And suddenly the batter hits the ball and it goes flying right by the kid. And he misses it because he was paying attention to the ants, not the ball or the game. And so these are generally just a nuisance out here and not considered to be damaging to the turf. Okay, when it comes to the insecticides, I hate to say it, I don't have anything good to say for you. And the reason for this is that in virtually all of our studies, we've had very poor control with a pyrethroid by itself. We've had very poor control with a neonicotinoid by itself. However, we get excellent control when you combine a neonicotinoid with a pyrethroid. And so that's the key. If you can figure out how to, and you don't have to buy these pre-made products. If you can buy the components, if you can buy, the clothianidin or the imidacloprid, and it doesn't have to be bifenthrin. It could be any of the pyrethroids, including permethrin. if you could get those and make a combination product. What do we think's going on here? Well, the pyrethroid kills the worker ants that are on the surface. Most of these ants also are maintaining insects in the soil that they use for food. And so that's what the neonicotinoid takes out. The neonicotinoid seems to take out these other, there's what we call soil-dwelling aphids, or root-inhabiting aphids, root-inhabiting mealybugs, and other things that they're using. These neonicotinoids seem to take those out, and so you get the double whammy. You kill the workers, you kill the food, the ant colonies disappear. Now, the most effective control for this is just applying one of these when the ant mounds first appear. Now, my feeling is in many of the Middle Eastern countries, that's probably you're just going to have to pick a time. And that may be in January, February, when you first see the major activity of the mounds for starting. Let me show you some data of what these look like. As I indicated to you, when you use the pyrethroids by itself, oh yeah, you really knock down the adult activity, but then soon the mound recovers. And so you can see long after that application that it comes back kind of with a vengeance. But and as you can see here, here's a tall star or another one. Again, we knocked down the ants initially, but then we got virtually no control with the ants. However, when we used the arena by itself, the meridian by itself, actually the arena did a pretty good job. That's the clothianidin. The meridian, what we did is we didn't get very good initial knockdown, but we did get some fairly good effective residual. But when we had the combination product, that's when we knocked down the ant immediately, and we had sustained ant reduction over a long period of time. Now, Khatib, we haven't talked about this. I don't know if you have access to these products. While the insecticides, the applied insecticides, either as sprays or as granules, are the most effective control for these, my feeling is you may have access to some of the ant baits. Why? Well, the hydromethalon and the Niban ant bait, which is basically a boric acid material, these are very low in toxicity, and many countries do allow these in their countries because of those low toxicities. The two that you might not be able to get would be the Avid or abamectin and the Fipronil. Again, those might not be available. But if you do have access, especially to the hydromethalon or the hydromethalon with the methoprene, these have been very effective ant control products. Now notice that they're baits. Now what does that mean? That means that they're in a formulation that usually contains a protein and an oil material and some sugars. And the protein and the sugars in those baits are attractive for the ants to pick them up, take them into the nest, and feed them to the larvae that are in the nest. And these are what we call slow-acting insecticides. So when the ant picks it up and ingests it, it doesn't kill the active ant, but when it takes it back into the colony and feeds it to the larvae, it kills the larvae. So what's an ant nest without larvae? It's an ant nest soon to die out because it dies out. Now the one with the methoprene, this is an insect growth regulator. What happens with that one is that when these baits are taken back into the nest and fed to the larvae, the queen or queens are also fed, and that methoprene will sterilize the queens so that she doesn't produce viable eggs any longer. So I mentioned these, that you can put them out. Now, what's the problem with using baits? the baits contain proteins and sugars. The proteins can be fairly rapidly degraded by sunlight, and the sugars can be removed pretty rapidly by rainfall or irrigation. So if you're going to use these baits, you kind of have to plan for it. What you need to do is get the water level in your turf up to a fairly high level. That means, irrigating extensively for a couple of days before you use these baits. Then maybe even water the afternoon that you're going to apply that bait. Then you would apply that bait late in the day to avoid the sunlight for that day. And you would turn your irrigation off that night so that you wouldn't have the sunlight to hit the bait, and you'd have the night so that you can have the maximum take up of that bait for at least a few hours after you made that application without having the sunlight or the irrigation degrading that bait. So you have to remember that when you're using a bait, it's different than a granule. It may look like a granule, but you're actually wanting the ants to pick up this. They interpret it as food material. You want them to pick it up, take it back to the nest, feed the larvae, feed the queen, take them out that way. Now, the other one that I suspect would be available, may not be available as the NIBAN, would be some of the boric acid ant baits, and those may also be available. Khatib, you and I can probably work together on this to find out, if any of these are available for you as a distributor in your particular areas. Okay, that's it. So there we have the mole crickets and the ants. Whoops, I think we've about gone over our time here. Khatib and all the rest of you, again, let me go back to that. I want to assure you that, again, I am available on the WhatsApp. I know a fair number of you have already communicated with me using WhatsApp and my phone number. So that's available to you here. Likewise, I've had some of the rest of you sending me pictures and questions at my email address at theshellar.1@osu.edu. Now, some of you have figured out that when you first get up over in the Middle East, I'm still awake. I'm a night owl. I'm usually awake here at 10, 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. And some of you have figured that out. And so I often will get, my phone will ding me at 12, 12:30, and it's usually one of you contacting me and asking a question. A lot of them have just been identifications of critters that you've come up with in the turf. And some of the rest of you are asking questions about timing of insecticides and products that you might be able to use and available for that. So again, I always welcome you. If I'm not up at that time of the night, I will try to get back to you the following morning, which is usually about 3 to 4 o'clock your time.
Thank you, Dave.
Okay, Khatib, did you want to end this up?
Any questions, guys?
I think it's getting close to happy hour.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you very much, Dave. Thank you,
Right.
Mike. Good to see you, Carl and Sue. And if you have any questions, feel free to send it to Dr. Dave, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for joining, and I'm sure there'll be questions come out of this, Khatib, and like Dave said, he's very accessible and very willing to help in this situation, because a very unique situation over there. So thank you, everybody, and Khatib, we'll look at doing another session down the road here.
Yeah, we'll plan something in the near future. Just send me the recording, and Dave send us the final PDF for today's presentation so we can share it with the people. to attend.
Will do.
Alrighty.
Thank
Sounds
you, guys.
good. Stay safe,
good day.
guys.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.